The construction of the pyramid was progressing at full speed. Pharaoh Khufu was ruling his country with great wealth and power, solidifying his people's loyalty to him every day. One of Khufu's greatest passions was making his beloved wife, Nefertari, happy. For him, the construction of the pyramid was not only important for his life after death but also as a demonstration of his love for his wife. One day, one of the stone masons found a unique and shiny stone. The stone was brighter than the others and seemed to almost emit its own light. The mason immediately reported this extraordinary discovery to the high priest, Imhotep. Imhotep immediately noticed the stone's captivating beauty and mystery. This was no ordinary stone. It seemed to contain a magical power within. Imhotep carefully took the stone and presented it to Pharaoh Khufu. When Khufu saw the stone, his eyes lit up. This stone truly possessed enchanting beauty. Its colors and sparkles seemed like a gift from the gods. "This stone will be the perfect gift for my wife Nefertari," Khufu said, examining the stone carefully in his hand. "She is the most precious thing in this world to me. This stone will symbolize her beauty and uniqueness." Imhotep nodded in agreement with the pharaoh's decision. This stone should be preserved in the deepest chamber of the pyramid, in a sacred place. Only the holiest place deserves to hold its power and beauty. As Khufu held the stone, he turned to Imhotep and spoke with a determined voice. "This stone will be the perfect gift for my beloved wife Nefertari. It will symbolize her beauty and uniqueness. But for us, it holds a deeper meaning. When we die, you will bury this stone in the heart of the pyramid with us. This way, it will help our souls find the path to Ra." Imhotep nodded in approval of the pharaoh's wish. "Of course, great pharaoh. This stone will be preserved in the holiest place and will accompany you on your journey to Ra." Khufu smiled as he admired the immense beauty of the stone once more. "Nefertari will love this gift," he said, carefully wrapping the stone to present it to his beloved wife. When Nefertari saw the unique gift Khufu brought her, her eyes sparkled. The brightness and colors of the stone seemed to radiate light from within. Khufu's expression of his love and devotion through this stone deeply touched Nefertari. "This stone will be a symbol of our love and fidelity," Khufu said, "and one day we will find the path to Ra with this stone." As night descended like a shroud over the palace, the temperature dropped, and a gentle breeze began to blow. The winds whispering through the stone walls echoed in the palace's silence. Pharaoh Khufu was trying to sleep in his bedchamber, but he couldn't close his eyes. There was an inexplicable unease within him, as if something was amiss. After a while, he got out of bed and stepped out of his room with heavy steps. The corridors were dimly lit by the faint glow of night torches, but shadows danced on the walls. With each step, the sounds echoing off the palace's stone floors intensified the chill growing inside Khufu. Suddenly, a slight breeze passed through the corridor. The pharaoh felt something behind this breeze but couldn't see what it was. His heart began to race, and his breath became shallow. He sensed indistinct shadows moving around him, as if something was watching him, approaching him. He wanted to shout, "Guards!" but no sound came out. His throat was dry, and words were stuck. Fear had seized his body. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and when he opened them again, the shadows seemed to have thickened. He quickened his pace, trying to move forward while looking around. But with each turn, the shadows grew more distinct, seemingly drawing closer to him. When Khufu finally threw open the outer door, 2 guards stood at attention. The pharaoh, in fear and anger, commanded them to check the corridor immediately, telling them something was there. The guards drew their swords and advanced into the corridor. Khufu stood by the door, catching his breath, his eyes wide with fear. After a while, one of the guards returned and said, "There's nothing there, my lord." The pharaoh glared at him in fury, shouting, "I told you there's something there. Check again." The guard moved back into the corridor, but they could not hear the other guard's voice. He had vanished into the corridor's darkness. The remaining guard called out to his companion but received no reply. Khufu, peeking around the corner in terror, watched the guard. Suddenly, the torches went out. The corridor plunged into complete darkness, and nothing could be seen. At that moment, a scream erupted from the darkness. There was a metallic clatter, as if armor was being shattered. Khufu, in horror, called out to the guard but got no response. The palace's silence only amplified his fear. Khufu sensed something behind him. His breath quickened, and his heart pounded wildly. But he didn't dare turn around. Whatever it was so close he could feel its breath on his neck. A cold, chilling touch brushed his shoulders. When he felt the weight of hands on his shoulders, fear engulfed him. The touch lasted a moment and then disappeared. Khufu's legs trembled, and he felt faint with terror. He collapsed to his knees, breathless. In the darkness of the corridor, aware of his solitude, Khufu trembled on his knees. An unknown terror prowled the stone walls of the palace, and it had gripped him in the clutches of fear. As Khufu tried to steady himself in the corridor, he suddenly heard a scream coming from the bedchamber. His heart began to race, and he struggled to walk, clinging to the walls for support. His steps were shaky and heavy, but he desperately wanted to reach his wife. When he opened the door, the scene he encountered was horrifying. Nefertari was lying on the bed, covered in blood. The pharaoh rushed to his wife's side. He cradled her in his arms, tears streaming down his face. "Who did this to you?" he cried out, filled with helplessness and rage. Nefertari's eyes were closed, and her body was motionless. Khufu gazed at her face, groaning in agony. Suddenly, Nefertari's eyes opened. But these were not the eyes of the woman he knew. There was a demonic glint in them. Her cold and empty stare froze Khufu's soul. Nefertari spoke in a voice that was not her own. "Come with me." Her voice was so altered it was unrecognizable, echoing off the walls of the room. Khufu wanted to pull back in terror but couldn't. Nefertari held a gleaming dagger in her hand and quickly plunged it into Khufu's chest. Pain racked the pharaoh's body, and his vision began to darken. As his strength waned, he looked into his wife's demonic face, nearing his final breath. Nefertari's smile echoed in Khufu's mind like a horrific nightmare. Finally, the darkness completely engulfed him, and everything fell into silence. For everyone in the palace, this incident was seen as a murder. The tragic death of Khufu spread throughout Egypt, and the people mourned the loss of their beloved pharaoh. High Priest Imhotep immediately took action to control the situation and arrange a funeral worthy of Khufu. Khufu's body was carefully prepared for mummification. The embalming chamber within the palace was filled with the scent of smoke and incense. Imhotep and the priests, with sacred prayers, cleansed the pharaoh's body and anointed it with special oils and ointments. Khufu's internal organs were meticulously removed and placed in 4 canopic jars. His heart, symbolizing wisdom and courage, was left in place. The pharaoh's body was carefully wrapped in fine linen strips. Prayers were recited and protective amulets placed within each layer. When the mummification process was complete, Khufu's body appeared peaceful, as if merely asleep. He was then placed in a sarcophagus adorned with gold and precious stones. The funeral procession began with great pomp. Khufu's sarcophagus was carried from the palace towards the pyramid. People gathered in the streets to see their pharaoh one last time, praying and shedding tears. Upon reaching the heart of the pyramid, Khufu's sarcophagus was placed in the most sacred chamber. Beside him, they placed his treasured belongings and amulets to help him find the path to Ra. The ceremony ended with prayers and hymns. As for Nefertari, her fate was very different. Under Imhotep's orders, her body was hurriedly mummified without the rituals performed for Khufu. Together with the cursed stone, she was buried in a hidden tomb in a remote corner of Egypt. The tomb was sealed with sacred seals, and the priests chanted prayers to bind the curse of the stone. Years passed, and these tragic events were buried deep within Egypt's history. Khufu's name, resting peacefully within the pyramid, became legendary over time. However, Nefertari and the cursed stone were lost in their forgotten tomb, swallowed by the dark pages of history. As Egypt's lands lay in tranquility over these secrets, no one ever recalled the dark mysteries of those days again. The operator of the device carefully pressed the buttons, and the geoscan began its operation. The device sent a powerful signal underground and started analyzing the returning signals. As the graphs on the monitor moved rapidly, Amelia and her team held their breath in anticipation. After a while, an anomaly appeared on the device's screen. Without taking her eyes off the screen, Amelia called out to the operator. "There's something in the returning signals. We've found something here." The team immediately marked the excavation site and began digging. They carefully marked the area and started to dig the soil with picks and shovels. With each passing minute, the ancient stones and structures emerging from the ground increased their excitement. After a day of intense excavation work, the team encountered a large stone door deep underground. Amelia held her breath as she examined the hieroglyphs on the stone door. "This could be Nefertari's tomb," she said, her voice trembling with excitement. As the excavations continued, they moved deeper into the tomb. Finally, when they opened the door to a large chamber, they found a magnificent sarcophagus. The sarcophagus was adorned with gold engravings and precious stones. The air inside the tomb carried the silence of centuries. Amelia carefully examined the valuable artifacts and the sarcophagus inside the tomb. "This is truly Nefertari's tomb," she said, her eyes welling up with tears. "And this tomb will be one of the greatest discoveries in history." The team meticulously documented and preserved everything they found. The discovery of Nefertari's tomb created a huge stir in the world of archaeology, and Amelia and her team achieved a success that would go down in history. After Amelia and her team discovered Nefertari's tomb, they carefully extracted the sarcophagus and transported it to the American Museum of Natural History. Upon its arrival, the sarcophagus was taken to a conservation room with utmost secrecy and care. This room was equipped with specialized equipment for every kind of analysis and restoration. Amelia meticulously examined the hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus. Other museum experts were by her side, all eagerly anticipating what Amelia might uncover. As Amelia read the hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus, her expression grew serious and concerned. "There are warnings here like 'do not open,'" she said, her voice trembling slightly. "These warnings might reflect the belief that the tomb is cursed." A museum official, curious, asked Amelia, "Cursed? Isn't that just a myth?" Amelia shook her head in response. "It could be a myth, but such warnings reflect the beliefs and fears of that era. We should still proceed with caution." After recording and photographing the hieroglyphs on the sarcophagus, the team decided to open it carefully. Amelia, along with her team, slowly lifted the lid of the sarcophagus. As the lid was opened, a sudden gust of wind swept through the room, causing several documents to fall to the floor. Then all the lights in the room suddenly went out. In the momentary darkness, everyone looked at each other. Fear and anxiety were evident on their faces. Fortunately, after a few seconds, the generator kicked in, and the lights came back on. Everyone in the room breathed a sigh of relief and started to chuckle. "That was creepy, huh?" said one museum worker, smiling. "Definitely," Amelia agreed, feeling somewhat relieved. When Amelia and her team fully opened the sarcophagus, they found a mummy adorned with gold and precious stones. Nefertari's mummy was extraordinarily well preserved. However, there was something else inside the sarcophagus: the cursed stone. Amelia examined the stone carefully. "This stone looks very special," she said. "Its presence here further reinforces the belief in its curse." They carefully placed the stone in a box and began to examine the other items inside the sarcophagus. The night after opening the sarcophagus, Amelia and her team hosted a small party at the museum to celebrate their success. Laughter and cheerful conversations echoed through the museum, but Amelia couldn't shake the feeling of unease inside her. When the party ended, Amelia returned home to find her husband Jake waiting for her at the door. "Come on, let's go to bed. You must be exhausted," Jake said, smiling. However, Amelia knew she wouldn't be able to sleep due to her uneasiness. "I'll read a book," she said, heading to the living room. She sat in her favorite chair and opened her book. As she tried to read, the power suddenly went out. Amelia was startled for a moment and then cursed under her breath. Damn electricity! What's going on? Even the streetlights were out, and the pale light of the full moon filtered through the window, dimly illuminating the room. She reached into the drawer next to her and pulled out a small rechargeable table lamp. The weak light was enough to read by, but it did nothing to calm her unease. She returned to her book, but the discomfort gnawed at her, making it impossible to focus. The words on the page seemed to make no sense. She lifted her eyes from the book and scanned the dark corners of the room. In one corner, she sensed a presence among the shadows. "Jake?" she whispered, but there was no response from her husband. Looking more intently, she saw a pair of eyes glinting in the darkness. Her heart began to race as she pointed the lamp in that direction, but the light wasn't strong enough. She called out to her husband again, "Jake, are you there?" Still, there was no answer. She stood up, her heart pounding, and walked cautiously toward the other side of the room. Squinting into the darkness, she couldn't see anyone. All she could hear was her own breathing and the rapid thumping of her heart. Filled with fear and curiosity, she returned to her seat. As soon as she sat down, she felt a presence behind her. It was so close she could feel its breath on her neck. A cold, chilling touch grazed her shoulders, then lightly touched her hair. Terrified, she could barely sit still. She suddenly jumped up and screamed, throwing her book in the direction of the presence. The book hit the wall and fell to the floor. There was nothing there. Amelia stood in the middle of the room, her breath coming in quick gasps, and her mind raced with confusion and fear. She knew something was terribly wrong, but she couldn't explain it. The sense of being watched, the cold touch. Everything felt too real to be a product of her imagination. She grabbed her lamp, clutching it tightly as if it were a lifeline, and slowly backed away from the corner, her eyes never leaving the spot where she had felt the presence. Just then, the power came back on, flooding the room with light. Amelia let out a relieved sigh, but the unsettling feeling lingered. She glanced around the room one last time, then hurried to find Jake, desperate for the comfort of his presence. Amelia withdrew her gaze from the dark corners of the room, noticing a faint glow seeping from under the bedroom door. Curiously, and with a hint of fear, she aimed the light towards the door. As she cautiously approached, she felt the floor beneath her feet was wet. However, this wasn't water. It was thicker and more viscous. She opened the door with trembling hands, illuminating the room with the lamp. What she saw filled her with horror. Her husband Jake lay on the floor, covered in blood. Panic-stricken and frightened, she rushed to his side. "Jake! Jake!" she screamed, but received no response from him. She quickly pulled out her phone and dialed for an ambulance, hands shaking as she desperately called for help. After ending the call, she ran to the bathroom, grabbed a clean towel, and returned to press it against Jake's stomach wound. "Hang on, Jake. Help is coming," she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. Suddenly, Jake's eyes snapped open. But these eyes were not those of her beloved husband. They glinted with a demonic light. "Come with me," he whispered in a cold and changed voice. Amelia froze in terror upon hearing those words, attempting to retreat in horror. But Jake swiftly plunged the knife in his hand into Amelia's chest. Pain surged through her body, and her vision began to fade. As she lost blood, the last thing she saw was Jake's demonic grin. When the ambulance arrived, paramedics rushed in and were met with a horrifying scene. Amelia and Jake's lifeless bodies lay on the floor. The incident was recorded in police files as a tragic murder. The secret of the cursed stone and the horror it left behind remained an unsolved mystery. The sarcophagus exhibited in the museum and the stone inside continued to unsettle people, and no one could uncover the truth behind this dark mystery. The curse silently continued to claim its victims, leaving only fear and death in its wake.